Welcome again to this first webinar from eExtension Map Assist in 2016 called Using Online Maps to Engage Your Audience. My name is Shane Bradt. I work at UNH Cooperative Extension in geospatial technologies and also water quality. And on this slide, you can see of the three groups I'm representing. One is UNH Cooperative Extension. The other is eExtension Map Assist, which is the geospatial technology group within eExtension. And another is the Mapping Innovation Hub, which is something that started just recently, and you'll be hearing more about in this coming year, trying to get people even more directly to use mapping across cooperative extension and in eExtension. So as I stated before, using online maps to engage your audience, I would say, is probably the overall theme of a lot of the work that people in Map Assist and also folks who use mapping and cooperative extension are looking at. This is meant to be a very basic introduction to the idea of why you might want to use online mapping, and looking very briefly at a few different examples of how online maps can be used or created. In the future, there will be more webinars on these specific topics. Some webinars on this have already been offered and may be offered again. You'll see that there are already 3 other webinars scheduled, which we'll mention in a moment. But I also hope that through chats or otherwise, as part of this webinar, that people might share a little bit about what it is that they're doing so that other people can understand all the ways that mapping can be used. So I mentioned the other webinars that are already scheduled. There was a blog post that I put together on the front page of eextension.org. or extension.org. This is one that I'll screenshot from it. So there's 4 webinars that are already scheduled. This is the first, and every several weeks we'll have more. One is more specific on how to use and really flex the muscles of ArcGIS Online. That's in early February. In late February, we'll have one about how you share your stories with maps, looking more specifically at story maps. And then on March 7th, we'll talk about how do you create story maps and maps right on your phone when you're out in the field. Again, this is between now and the eExtension event in March, and after that, I'm sure we'll have many more, and I hope that maybe even possibly some of you would be willing to give a webinar or at least give us ideas about specific topics that we could use. And that link at the bottom of the screen will direct you right to that blog post that has these specific links at the bottom. So one of the reasons to talk about online mapping in general is the fact that mapping has been such an important part of the way that people communicate about topics, and also the way that cooperative extension does its job. Now, traditionally, it would have been some sort of paper map that was printed out and put on the table or hung on the wall. But something about maps, especially for a room full of people who have some sort of invested idea or desire related to the maps, really seems to serve as a starting point for conversations. And often for those of us who have worked in GIS, geospatial technology, and mapping, you realize that the map that you brought with an idea that you thought you would be able to communicate to people is really only the beginning of the discussion. And often being able to look at things in a spatial context leads to a lot of different avenues and a lot of different insights. So now that we have this idea, and there are still plenty of times that we have paper maps or sort of non-interactive digital maps, so using like sending around JPEGs or something similar to that, having that on a website. There's a lot of different ways that we could potentially engage our audience and potentially reach people through the use of online maps. And one of the ways that online maps are different than a paper map or perhaps just something like a JPEG that's shared or posted online is you're able to interact with the map. You can pan around, you can look at different places. Often there's text that you can put on the map or pictures that are relevant to location. You can have audio files. There's a lot of different ways that you can use an online map in an interactive, through an interactive standpoint that you would never be able to do with a paper map. And one of the things I really want to point out is that even though you may be in a room at a given moment, you still could use an online map to communicate. It doesn't just have to be when people are away. And one of the problems, of course, with all online content is that people do have to have internet connection, and for some of these maps, their internet connection has to be fairly fast. So there will always be times where interactive online maps are not the way to go. But there's so much potential offered by what online maps can do, particularly as Cooperative Extension tries to reach out to larger groups or tries to reach out to the same group with perhaps less funding or less power or person power. Online maps can provide a bridge to be able to communicate with and connect with our target audiences. Now, there's a variety of ways that you could use them, and I have a few examples of how I've used them in my work. But again, for the folks that are out there, if anybody wants to put in the chat box ways that they've used maps, ways that they think they might want to use maps, maybe even a specific example of an online map, I'd be happy to share it with people. If you want to raise your hand as well, I could go ahead and unmute you if you'd like to share it in that way. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and talk about a couple of the ways that I envision the online maps could be used to engage folks. I'll wait for a few seconds. So one of the specific ways that online maps can be used to engage people is by having people have information that's relevant to a discussion before they arrive at that discussion. So a specific example that you may use is when people want to, for example, assess what's going on in a community. One of the traditional ways that people would do this is to have folks send in information or gather together in a meeting and share that information directly face-to-face. One of the possibilities for using online maps to facilitate the interaction with the audience is to have the online map created with the information before people arrive. So if they're sending pictures and texts or stories, have those come in, have them be displayed in an online map, and then send that online map out to people before the actual event. You could use that online map at the event and even have people at the event walk away from that event, having the information that they could then view at home and share with others. And this is a specific example which is being used in, or is going to be used in, the Community and Economic Development Group here at Cooperative Extension in New Hampshire. Of course, another way that you could use interactive online maps is to create something that people are able to edit themselves directly. So there's lots of work in the area of crowdsource mapping, which allows people to contribute data to a map online. There's various ways you can set that up that we'll be covering specifically in future webinars. But you don't even have to be the portal necessarily for the information by having people send it to you. You can create online maps so that community members or others have that mechanism of engaging, being able to not only share information with them, but have information contributed directly. And another way that online maps are used very powerfully is to have people who have lots and lots of relevant data, perhaps from a GIS clearinghouse or data they've developed themselves, be able to create online maps which you could then share out with the public. And obviously this is something that online maps have been doing for quite a while, but it allows the non-GIS user to interact with and view the map, whether it's something relatively simple like Google Earth or Google Maps, which a lot of people use just for basic mapping, or it's something more complex where state clearinghouses or other folks have put very relevant, specific GIS data in a usable, understandable way, which they then share with people for them to be able to interact with, get information with, and also perhaps even print out, depending on how the website is set up. So there's lots of different ways that information can be shared and, shared and accessed using online maps. And so far, I have no examples of the way people have used it. Does anybody have anything out there they'd like to share before I go forward? Now, one of the things, of course, and we will be covering in a future webinar, is about how do you create these maps and how do you contribute data to these maps. And one of the most exciting and potentially disturbing developments in our society is the availability and the use of smartphones. So there has been work quite a bit in our region in New England for folks doing training, and I'm sure around the country, of how to use smartphones to contribute to maps. And there's a lot of ways that you can have people collect data and send them in to be displayed in maps, sometimes directly through a specific app, and in other times by collecting pictures or comments and then sharing them through an online map. So if you think that online maps are important, or you think they could be useful, or you think that they're a way to engage or share information, what are your options? Well, part of the fact is that there are so many options for online mapping that it's even difficult to start to get your head around the possibilities. Now, from my perspective, and I think from at least in New Hampshire, from Cooperative Extension's perspective, we're looking for ideas or solutions that people without a lot of coding experience or without a lot of technical skill would be able to use. So if you have the ability to do coding yourself, or if you have money to hire somebody to do coding, there's a really different set of options that are available to you. But if you're looking for some online maps, whether they're basic or complex, but you yourself don't have any coding experience, some of the options are more limited, but there are still definitely more than one choice. So we could spend an entire hours of webinars worth going through all the different options, but I wanted to highlight 3 of them that are among the easiest to deal with and also have options that you can use them at no cost. So you can start using them for free. And again, these aren't the only 3 that are out there, but these are 3 that people who can use computers and people who are willing to be a little patient and learn how to use specific applications could use them without a lot of technical experience or coding. So one of them that's fairly simple, which probably a decent amount of people have used, but not everybody realizes perhaps you can use to make and share maps, is Google Maps. So Google Maps and Google Earth back in 2005 really changed the way that people thought about maps. And in a recent survey by the Department of Environmental Services here in New Hampshire, they found out that 75% of both the people that worked at DES and the people who were the clients of DES chose as their preferred mapping platform Google Maps. So there certainly are options, and all you need to use Google Maps is to have a Google account. Now, if you have a Gmail account, that would be fine. Occasionally, there are some corporate Gmail accounts which don't or Google accounts which work a little differently, but Gmail was fine. Also, if you have an e-extension account, if you're listening to this and you're in Cooperative Extension, you can get an e-extension account. That also serves as a Google login. So you could use the exact same username and password that you use to log into e-extension to get into Google and to make some maps. So when you first start up Google Maps, you may not have noticed this before, but if you click on this menu here, and one of the problems with online mapping sites is that they change all the time. So this looks different than it did a few months ago, and certainly different than it did a few years ago. In addition to all of these different options for maps, you also have this ability to click on My Maps. Now, right now, I have one quick map, but down here at the bottom, you can click on Create Map. And there's several different ways that you can create a basic map. Now, if you used Google My Maps before, several years ago, this looks and acts quite a bit different, but there are some similarities. First of all, if you have mapping data you've collected outside of Google Maps, you can click on Import. And there's a variety of formats that you can bring in. CSV is a common text format. KML is something from Google Earth. XLS is an Excel file. And GPX is a file that comes off of a GPS unit. All of these you can drop and or select a file from a computer, and it will plot them on the map. Something else that you can do is go ahead and draw on the map itself. So you have the ability to add lines and points onto the map, and you can put as much or as little detail as you want. and start to build those layers from scratch. Now notice that you can add images and videos. Since this is Google, you can also have it automatically generate directions. And as you go adding your points to the map, you can start building your map from scratch. You can also draw lines, shapes, and you can see that there's some more advanced features here since you have the Google background of adding routes, biking, or walking. So if you wanted to draw a simple shape, you could draw that as well. Now, one of the things that Google Maps has added is the ability to have different layers. So you can have different names of different layers. You can have styles applied to them in a way that you couldn't in the past. And as always in Google Maps, you can collaborate with people. So you can share the map with different folks. Depending on if people have Google accounts or not, they can edit. You can also embed these maps and the results of maps on web pages. There's lots of very easy ways to share maps. Now, one of the good things about Google Maps is a lot of people have created and used Google Maps, so they're probably not that, they're probably fairly familiar with the way that they work. There are some maps you can make for free depending on how many layers you have, and if you want to put in past a certain number of layers, you do have to pay a small fee per month. The good thing about Google Maps is it's fairly quick and easy. One of the things that's a little bit difficult perhaps about Google Maps, or that will make it perhaps a little bit less powerful, is that if you'd like to incorporate lots of different types of GIS data, or you have very specific data you'd like to bring in, sometimes it can be somewhat challenging to bring it in. But generally speaking, quick and easy maps you can mark up, send to people, and collaborate with. Google Maps has quite a few potential options. And keep in mind, of course, if you have any extension account, you already have a Google account, and a lot of people have Gmail accounts anyway that they can use without having to sign up for anything additional to make these maps. So that's one quick option. Does anybody have, let's see if anybody has any points, questions? Just checking back to the message board. All right. Another option for making online maps is something called Mango Maps, and I will admit that this is the only Facebook ad I've ever clicked on, was something that was presented to me in Facebook for Mango Maps. So as you can see here, there's lots of different types of maps that you can make. And as with most of these mapping situations, there's online maps that you can make for free. And then depending on what features you have, you may want to, or they may require that you pay a bit more. Now, if you have GIS data, you can use it in these maps, and there's quite a few different options that you can use. So instead of going through that and drilling down, I'm just going to look at some of the different map galleries that they have up. So for example, here is a highway maintenance plan map that was created in Mango Maps. Now, in some ways, this can be similar to Google Maps, where you zoom in and out, or any sort of online map. But also, you can use a decent amount, excuse me, of GIS data and incorporate them specifically into the maps. As you see, you can have a map legend here. You can have various tools. They have some sort of street view similar, Google Street View. Let's look at one additional one. So here's Farm Registry in the Philippines. Oops. Of course, I would pick one that doesn't exist anymore. And again, Mango Maps evolved in a response to the idea that people had GIS data and they wanted to make interactive online maps with it. You can also see that there are ways to turn on and off different boundaries, different labels. And you can see, as you can do in any GIS program, you can also have and set up ways that people are able to display graduated colors and do GIS actions on these maps. So one of the big differences, of course, between sort of basic interactive maps and perhaps slightly more advanced interactive maps is your ability to act on and work with GIS data. So if you already have GIS data that has attribute tables and you'd like to be able to use those to control the features of the maps, that's an important consideration, and it's a more effective way to show and share data. Now, out of curiosity, anybody have any questions, comments? People use Mango Maps? Okay, so we have one quick question about what is the limitations of the free Mango Maps. That was a question. Let's go back to here and go up to pricing, because I think it spells it out fairly well. So you can see it goes from free to quite a bit of money per month, up to $400. One of the things that you can see about the free maps is, of course, that they will have the Mango branding on it. So if it's something that you don't necessarily want people to know that you're using Mango Maps, it will be difficult unless you pay money. Also, the total amount of storage that you have is a limitation. So if you're using data and you want lots of data, you only have 200 megabytes of storage, which for some uses may be plenty. And you can do free maps, and you see as you pay more, the total amount of maps that you can make increases. Now, if you click this View All Features, you get a lot more information. But I do think that this one schematic shows pretty well. Basically, you're getting the ability to have as many map layers as you want, but you can only have several maps. People know it's Mango Maps, and you won't be able to store a tremendous amount of data, although for a lot of ways, 200 megabytes may be enough. Any other questions? Okay. And one of the larger options, and I know there are other people even in this region, including Connecticut and Rhode Island, that have used this quite extensively in their training programs, is using something called ArcGIS Online. And ArcGIS Online is the online mapping offering from one of the largest GIS companies in the world called Esri. And this is something that's evolved tremendously over time, especially over the past couple of years. For a long time, people who had desktop GIS really didn't have a great way to share their maps online, again, without knowing folks and having a bunch of technical skills and money. And this evolved in a way to be Esri's solution to having a GIS or a GIS-capable version of something that Google Maps offered, which is a way to make maps online without a lot of technical skill. I will say probably out of these three options, ArcGIS Online is the one that's the most complex in some ways, but it's also the one that has probably the most total capabilities, particularly if you get the paid account and or you have the desktop GIS. Now, one of the things I always tell people about is if you want to try ArcGIS, instead of clicking Try ArcGIS here, you want to click on the Sign In page. So it gives you the option to have either a 60-day free trial of the paid version, or it has this public account, which is free. Now, one of the things that there's a lot of discussion about in the past is whether or not these public accounts would continue to exist and whether or not they would remain free. And from everything I've heard over the past few years, this seems to be part of Esri's business strategy to have this. So most of the online mapping features can be done both with a public account and also with the 60-day trial account. Of course, keep in mind, if you try the trial after 60 days, it will lock up. If you have the free public account, you can continue to use it off into the future. So in some ways is similar to this Mango map pricing with unlimited map layers. The big difference is that you're not going to have any limitation to the amount of maps that you can make. Now, if you go to ArcGIS and click on this gallery, you're going to see that there are lots and lots and lots of different types of maps and different options. Just quickly to show you what ArcGIS Online looks like. Again, most of these online interactive mappers don't look tremendously different. If you first go to arcgis.com and then click on Map, you get the typical zoom in, zoom out button, home button. You can do measurements. If you'd like to see what it's like to add data to the map, you can even try that without having an account. You just can click on Modify Map. And one of the things I think that's fairly powerful of ArcGIS Online is that you're able to add data from your computer, similarly to those others. There's a lot of GIS file support. You can also add data from the web if you know of a specific server address. But the really powerful thing is that you can search for layers across all of the ArcGIS Online infrastructure. So if you're looking for something specific, like, who knows, conservation lands, for example, you can type in conservation lands and click Go, and you have a whole bunch of different conservation lands that are layers that may be available across the country or around the world. Now, of course, one of the problems with any sort of Web 2.0 solution where people can post them is that some of these things may not be very reliable, and it's something that you're going to have to consider as you work on ArcGIS Online. But it seems to provide data in a way and allow people to post data and share data in a way that's fairly advanced compared to most of the other mapping options. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about ArcGIS Online, but before I do, just let me check back and see if there's any questions or comments. Now, I know some of you out there have used ArcGIS Online before. Does anybody have any examples of how they've used it or thoughts on ArcGIS Online before I go into a little bit more specifics? One of the things that's, I think, the most compelling about ArcGIS Online is not just the types of maps you can make, but the way you can share them after you've made the maps. So as one quick example, here is a project that I have been using or working with a group looking at whale sightings data and marine debris data. Now, these maps are sort of messy. Part of this is a work in progress, but the interesting thing, of course, is not just getting the data on the map, and here's a map of different whale sightings and also marine debris that was recorded in different locations. But once you have the map, what you're able to do with it after the fact. So one thing you could do, just like you can do with Google Maps and Mango Maps, is you could embed this map in a website. Another thing you can do is make something called a web app, which is has a different way of displaying and sharing the data. A second thing that you can do, which is pretty interesting, is something called a presentation. So you can build a presentation that you can use to display information to people and to share information in an interactive way. So as long as you have internet connection, of course, you could give a presentation using live map data. Now, in the past, what you would do, of course, is take screenshots and then advance maybe your PowerPoint slide one at a time. But using something like ArcGIS Online, you can create a presentation. Now, we're going to go into more details about this in future webinars, but for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and just play what a presentation could look like. So what you can do using ArcGIS Online is you can zoom into specific areas of your map. You can have some sort of annotation. So for example, up here I put from the boat ramp and choose a different background so that you can begin to tell a little bit of a story. So here are the 5 different slides that I created. You can either have them play through, it'll advance automatically, or you can forward one slide at a time. So this is, for example, saying from the boat ramp, I decided to zoom in and use a light gray background. Clicking the whales are in danger brought me to an area that shows whale sightings and also shows some debris around there. And keep in mind that this is not a screenshot, but this is an interactive live map that you can then, if you choose to, in the middle of the presentation, zoom in and out and explore different relationships. Again, you can have a next slide, and then a final slide showing different points. You can have these play and loop. So if I go back to the beginning, it'll advance through the slides at whatever pace that I've set them. Of course, this is faster than I would normally use them. But just to have an idea, you could imagine perhaps if you had a screen or if somebody else was sharing this information, they could set up the map to go ahead and advance and then automatically play. So it allows you, once you have your map done, it allows you to be able to then have a specific message and a way of showing people that map that can run in an automated way or can allow you to guide people through that map in a different context. The other thing that you can do is create what are called web apps. Again, the next webinar we're talking about in ArcGIS Online, we're going to go through a lot of specifics on this. But as one example of a web map that you can do is something called a swipe map. So you can have 2 different types of maps that are shown. And again, this requires no coding. This just requires knowing how to make maps using ArcGIS Online. So we have one map here on the right, which is the marine debris, and another map on the left, which is the whale populations or the whale sightings. You can swipe back and forth to compare perhaps where the whales were versus the marine debris. And another, for example, that you can do is create a map where you have various tabs of data. So we had one map from 2011, another from 2010, and another from 2009. So as you scroll around looking at different areas and different features, you can click from apparently 2011 to 2010 and then 2009. So once you have your map, quote unquote, done, using ArcGIS Online, there's a lot of different things that you can do to create versions of that map that you can use to share with people. Now, there are some pretty compelling versions of these maps that can be created without a whole lot of coding, but some of these, of course, can take a tremendous amount of work. Just double check to see if I have any questions before I show some quick examples of perhaps compelling offerings of what can be done with ArcGIS Online. So just as an example of a type of map that can be made using ArcGIS Online, and this is a webinar that we'll be doing, I think it's the 3rd webinar on story maps. Over time, these web apps or these templates have evolved to really be not just about sharing maps, but starting to tell stories and communicate information. One of the problems with maps is when you put them up there, some people like to explore maps and move around and click, but other times people don't know what those maps are trying to show and how they would use those maps to get information. So using something called a story map template, this is an example of a student project that was done in an online class that I teach. And this was a story map showing an important topic to her, which was the sea star wasting syndrome on the west coast of the US and Canada. So again, this was done with no coding experience, just information about how to use maps And you can see, for example, that this disease strikes, this beginning isn't even really a map. It's just a series of images that start the story of the information that she was trying to share. As you click on various tabs, there's more relevant information, including some basics on wasting syndrome, a couple of embedded videos. She even has a page that will allow information to be input. Now, she didn't create this page, but this is a place where people are collecting data about Syst wasting syndrome. And then she did include some maps, and here's an online map that she made in ArcGIS Online using the outbreak from 2013, outbreak from 2014, and outbreak from 2015, so that you can compare them side by side. She also decided to make an affected species map, so this one's a slightly different version of the map, looking at different species that were affected in different years. And she also embedded a news update showing, linking or embedding a website which was having updates at the time of various things, including a YouTube video here that was posted. So using ArcGIS Online and a bit of training and a lot of information that she already had outside of ArcGIS Online, it allowed her to create this really story, using the story map to lead people through a variety of issues related to the Syst wasting syndrome. Again, done with no coding experience and just a bit of training. And probably one of the most compelling examples I've seen of the use of ArcGIS Online to communicate is this wonderful Connecticut's changing landscape map that was created at UConn, and the institution within UConn is called CLEAR. I think it's the Center for Land Use, Education, and Research. And I think a few of these folks are on the webinar today. This is a wonderful example of how maps can be used to engage people and communicate with folks. So this is again, an example of ArcGIS Online Story Map, which shows, can imagine sitting at a coffee table and having this as a book that you can flip through the pages. And you can see, of course, this first page shows an image, doesn't even show a map. But as you flip through the pages by scrolling down, or by clicking down here, or by clicking on these buttons, it brings you both to information here. Could be YouTube videos, different pie charts, but also interactive maps that you can zoom in and out on. Each page making a point, and each one of these things leading you through a piece of information that they wanted to share. Now, this is another example of a type of map you can make using ArcGIS Online. In my example previous, I used a swipe map. This is something using same exact setup, but using what they call a spyglass, where you can see the land use inside the spyglass, and then the aerial photos outside the spyglass. And you can see as you advance through these and you turn these pages of this book, a story emerges that shows different information for different points that they would like to make. And again, these maps that are here are interactive versions of the map. So I haven't quite seen any other online mapping application that has quite the versatility of this ArcGIS Online. And there's other things you can do if you have the more advanced version or the subscription account of ArcGIS Online, including some geoprocessing or more advanced analysis, and some mobile data collection where you can configure maps to have people out in the field with smartphones inputting data directly to that map. But this seems to be, for me, one of the more exciting possibilities of displaying information in an engaging way, and potentially having people that you're working with contribute data to your map and to your project. So, as I said, lots of other options that are out there. These seem to be three of the most compelling, and also three that have free options. Are there limitations in the free options? Yeah, there are limitations, but in a lot of cases, you can use these still to make a map. You can either share information with people or allow them to submit information to you or to a group of people. As we go forward, both in Map Assist and other folks in Cooperative Extension across the country who are doing mapping, trying to tie together this year and make available and plan also strategically different ways that we can share with information with people about how you can use online mapping. So a lot of the different talks or a lot of the different points that were brought up in today's webinar will be specific webinars, each and of their own, in the coming months. As I stated, we already have 3 that are scheduled. The next one is much more information on ArcGIS Online. What I showed today was just briefly going through some of the options. We're going to get into more details about how you work on them. The following webinar, which is a few weeks later, will be about story maps. So once you understand ArcGIS Online, how do you use story maps to create and tell stories? And the 4th one will be a little bit about creating story maps on your mobile device. There's an app that you can use, and there are also various ways that you can collect data on your mobile device and relatively easily be able to turn it into a story map. Now, at the extension meeting, the I3 core meeting in March, we will be doing, well, possibly be doing some sessions on story mapping. One of the other things that we're going to be doing over the course of the next year is trying to gather information about who's doing what with online maps, what works for engaging people, what hasn't worked. It would be nice if there was a one place that we could feature some of the great work that's being done across Cooperative Extension with this, and hopefully learn from one another about different techniques that we could use for creating and sharing information through online maps. Okay. So if you have any additional questions, which so far we've only had one, but any additional questions or you want to make comments, I'm open to whatever it is that people would like to say. There's a whole bunch of information on the screen at once, but I wanted to show you all the relevant links for geospatial technology stuff at eExtension, also some of the work that I do in Cooperative Extension, and then some contact information for me directly. This is the first of many webinars that will be done this year. There's lots of good webinars that have already been done in the past that we're going to try to compile, but I also wanted to move forward starting this year with sort of a sequential step. Are there any questions, thoughts, comments? Yes, and Emily Wilson, who was one of the authors of that story map, is on the call today. And I'm not just talking about it because I saw that you would be on the webinar, Emily. It's true. I use that as an example all the time, and of a good use of mapping to communicate effectively. And I believe that it was awarded one of the prizes for use of that sort of map by Esri in the educational setting. So a lot of work went into that, but it's a pretty compelling example of what you can do with interactive online maps. Okay, since there are no more questions, thank you very much for joining. I look forward to future webinars, and if you have any specific topics, or you are already doing webinars or would be willing to do a webinar on any mapping topic related to engaging audiences, getting information out to people, collecting information, please don't be shy. Get in touch with me. That's my direct contact info. We'd love to have examples of what people are doing all over the country. And also, as people know, probably as they get used to working in GIS, there's only so much one person can know. So the more that we have people contributing to it, I think the better off that we all will be. This recording will be posted very soon on the same Learn page where this webinar was listed. If you have any folks that you think might have been interested and missed it, know that it will be there. And also know that going forward, we're going to have more webinars, and they will be more specific and get more into detail with less total topics than this one. It's meant to be a larger overview. Thanks very much. Have a great day.